The raccoon appeared like a ghost in the misty dawn light, standing motionless at the edge of the Thompson family's backyard. 8-year-old Ethan froze, his small hand clutching the doorframe. He'd recognize that distinctive maple leaf marking anywhere, even after a year, even with 4 young raccoons now trailing behind her like dutiful soldiers. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Maple?" he whispered, his voice catching. The mother raccoon tilted her head, intelligent eyes fixed on him with unmistakable recognition. The connection between them crackled like electricity across the dewy grass. Behind Ethan, his father's heavy footsteps approached. "Son, what are you looking at?" Ethan couldn't answer, couldn't break the spell of this impossible moment. After everything, the loss, the fights, the heartbreak, she had returned. The creature everyone had called a nuisance had come back to change their lives once more. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Oak Ridge had once been the kind of town where everybody knew your name, where doors stayed unlocked, and where nature and civilization existed in respectful balance. But times had changed. New developments sprouted up where woodland once stood, and the town's oldest families struggled to recognize the place they'd called home for generations. The Thompson house sat at this precise intersection of old and new, a weathered 2-story craftsman with peeling blue paint, defiantly standing its ground as modern homes with pristine landscaping encroached from all sides. Like the house, the Thompson family was hanging on by threads that grew thinner each day. Ethan Thompson wasn't always the quiet boy who sat alone at lunch. Before his mother Sarah's illness, he'd been known for his boisterous laugh and endless questions. Now, 8 months after her passing, that laugh had become as rare as summer snow. His once bright eyes had taken on the cautious, watchful quality of someone who understood that the things you love can disappear in an instant. "Ethan, you'll be late for school," called Martha Thompson, his grandmother, as she shuffled around the kitchen. She'd moved in 3 months ago when it became clear that Robert Thompson, still drowning in grief and medical bills, couldn't manage alone. At 72, Martha brought with her the quiet wisdom of the mountains where she'd been raised, along with strange old stories that Ethan had only recently begun to appreciate. "Coming, Grandma," Ethan replied, shoving his sketchbook under his pillow. The pages were filled with increasingly detailed drawings of raccoons, one raccoon in particular with a distinctive marking on her face. Robert Thompson entered the kitchen, already dressed in his construction uniform. The irony wasn't lost on Martha that her son-in-law had once dedicated his career to protecting wildlife and now spent his days clearing land for the very developments threatening their habitats. But medical bills didn't pay themselves, and the wildlife department had offered compassionate leave, not compassionate pay. "There's a town meeting next week," Robert mentioned, downing his coffee. "Harrison's rallying support for his Clean Up Oak Ridge initiative." Martha snorted. "That man wouldn't know clean if it washed him in bleach. He just wants to drive out anything that doesn't increase his property values." Across the fence, as if summoned by his name, Theodore Harrison emerged onto his pristine deck. At 68, he'd retired from real estate development only to continue the work as a community advocate. His trimmed silver hair and tailored casual wear screamed success, just as his perpetual frown screamed dissatisfaction with anything less than perfection. What none of them knew was that 20 miles away, Amelia Parker was packing her wildlife conservation gear into her truck, preparing to answer Oak Ridge's call about nuisance animals. She couldn't have imagined that this routine job would bring her face to face with the father who'd disowned her 15 years ago for choosing animals over the family business, the very same Theodore Harrison who was now campaigning to have the town's wildlife removed. And none of them could have possibly known that the injured raccoon seeking shelter in the Thompsons' storage shed would soon connect their lives in ways both beautiful and painful. Ethan first discovered the raccoon on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of spring day that couldn't decide between sunshine and rain. He'd been sent to retrieve his father's hammer from the old storage shed, a task he normally avoided due to the spiders that had claimed the weathered structure as their own. The door creaked open, revealing dust motes dancing in the slanted sunlight. That's when he heard it, a faint, pained whimper coming from behind his father's workbench. Most children would have run for an adult, but since his mother's passing, Ethan had developed an instinct for things that were suffering. "Hello?" he called softly, crouching down. A pair of eyes gleamed in the shadows, bright with fear and something else, intelligence that seemed almost human. The raccoon was huddled in the corner, her breathing labored. Even to Ethan's untrained eye, her swollen belly made it clear she was pregnant and in no condition to flee. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, remaining perfectly still. "I won't hurt you." The raccoon watched him warily, her sides heaving with each breath. A distinctive marking on her face, a patch of dark fur shaped remarkably like a maple leaf, stood out against her gray coat. Ethan slowly reached into his pocket, pulling out the beef jerky his father had packed in his lunch. He hadn't been hungry lately. Food had lost its appeal in the months since Mom died. Carefully, he tore off a small piece and placed it on the floor, then backed away. "Go on," he encouraged. "You look hungry." The raccoon's nose twitched. She seemed to be weighing her fear against her hunger, a calculation that took several minutes to resolve. Finally, still keeping her eyes on Ethan, she inched forward and snatched the jerky, retreating quickly to her corner. Something about her cautious movement struck Ethan as odd. He'd seen wild raccoons before. They typically fled from humans or displayed more aggression when cornered. This one seemed almost familiar with human presence, though clearly distrustful. "You need a name," Ethan decided, studying the leaf-shaped marking. "I'll call you Maple." The hammer forgotten, Ethan spent the next hour sitting cross-legged on the shed floor, slowly feeding Maple tiny pieces of jerky, talking to her in the gentle voice he used to reserve for telling his mother about his day. When his grandmother called him for dinner, Ethan reluctantly left, promising, "I'll be back tomorrow, Maple. Don't worry." That night, unable to sleep, Ethan snuck downstairs to his grandmother's bookshelf. Martha Thompson had a collection of nature guides that rivaled the local library. He pulled out North American Mammals and turned to the section on raccoons, reading by flashlight under his covers until his eyes grew heavy. The next morning, Ethan stopped by the school library before class, checking out every book they had on raccoons. During lunch, while other kids played and socialized, he sat alone, absorbing information about his new secret friend. What he learned troubled him. Raccoons weren't supposed to eat processed meats like jerky. They needed a varied diet of fruits, nuts, eggs, and natural proteins. He'd been feeding her all wrong. After school, Ethan emptied his piggy bank and walked to the small grocery store on the corner, carefully selecting apples, grapes, unsalted nuts, and eggs. The cashier raised an eyebrow at the strange assortment, but said nothing as Ethan carefully counted out his change. When he returned to the shed, Maple was still there, looking marginally better than the day before. This time, she watched him with less fear, almost as if she'd been expecting him. "I brought you better food," Ethan explained, arranging his offerings on a paper plate. "The books say this is what you're supposed to eat." To his surprise and slight disappointment, Maple showed little interest in the fruits. She sniffed at them briefly before looking back at Ethan with what he could have sworn was expectation. "You want the jerky, don't you?" he sighed, pulling the last piece from his pocket. "This isn't good for you, you know." Maple took the jerky eagerly, and Ethan frowned. Her preference for processed food was another sign that something wasn't right. Wild raccoons didn't usually prefer human food over their natural diet. Over the next week, a routine developed. Ethan would visit Maple twice daily, before school and after, bringing a variety of foods and always ending with a small piece of jerky as a treat. He started leaving a shallow dish of water, which she drank gratefully. Her condition seemed to be improving, though her pregnancy was visibly progressing. In his bedroom, Ethan's sketchbook filled with drawings of Maple, her distinctive face marking, her dexterous paws, the way she tilted her head when he spoke to her. He found himself talking to her more and more, sharing thoughts he'd kept bottled inside since his mother died. "Dad doesn't laugh anymore," he told her one afternoon, "and I don't know how to make him happy again. Mom would know what to do." Maple watched him with those intelligent eyes, and Ethan felt truly listened to for the first time in months. One evening, as Ethan was finishing his homework, his grandmother knocked gently on his door. "May I come in?" Martha asked, her voice warm but concerned. "Sure, Grandma," Ethan replied, hastily covering his latest raccoon drawing with his math worksheet. Martha sat on the edge of his bed, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "I was changing your sheets today and found this under your pillow." She held up his sketchbook, open to a detailed portrait of Maple. Ethan's heart sank. His secret was discovered. "That's just something I made up," he stammered. Martha's eyes, wise from decades of raising children who thought they could fool her, saw right through him. "This is very specific for something made up," she observed, tracing the maple leaf marking in the drawing. "Especially when I notice some of our food going missing, and small footprints by the shed." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't tell Dad. She's hurt and going to have babies. She needs me." Martha studied her grandson's face. Since Sarah's death, this was the most animation she'd seen in him, the most passion. Instead of scolding him, she asked, "Have you been feeding this raccoon?" "Yes," Ethan admitted. "I've been giving her healthy stuff mostly, but she really likes jerky." Martha sighed. "Wild animals should remain wild, Ethan. Feeding them human food isn't good for them. It makes them dependent and changes their natural behaviors." "But she was already hurt, and I think—" Ethan hesitated, then pushed forward. "I think she might have been someone's pet before. She acts different from wild raccoons." Martha's expression turned thoughtful. "That would explain some things. But even former pets that have been released can't be treated like domestic animals. They need to maintain their wild instincts, especially if she's going to have kits." "Kits?" Ethan asked. "Baby raccoons," Martha explained, "and they'll need a mother who can teach them to survive in the wild." She paused, considering. "Show me this raccoon. Let me see what we're dealing with." Relief flooded through Ethan. His grandmother wasn't angry, and she hadn't immediately told him to stop. Together, they snuck out to the shed, where Maple was curled in the nest Ethan had made from old towels. Martha observed the raccoon with experienced eyes. "You're right about one thing. That's not normal wild behavior, and that marking is unusual. Almost looks man-made, like someone dyed her fur. Will you help me take care of her?" Ethan asked hopefully. Martha thought carefully before answering. "I'll help you do what's best for her, which might not be what you think. We'll need to get some proper information, and this stays between us for now. Your father has enough worries without adding a pregnant raccoon to the list." As they walked back to the house, Martha shared stories from her youth about the relationships between people and wildlife. "My grandmother, your great-grandmother, was part Cherokee. She taught me that animals aren't just creatures to be used or avoided. They're messengers, teachers. When an animal crosses your path repeatedly, it's bringing you a lesson you need to learn." "What lesson is Maple bringing me?" Ethan wondered aloud. Martha smiled. "That's for you to discover. But I suspect it has something to do with healing. For both of you." That night, Ethan slept better than he had in months, comforted by the knowledge that his secret was shared and that for now at least, Maple would continue to have his help. What he couldn't know was how much that help would be needed in the days to come, or how his small act of kindness would ripple out to affect not just his family, but the entire community of Oak Ridge. The night Maple went into labor was one Ethan would never forget. Spring storms had been battering Oak Ridge for 3 days, turning the ground to mud and sending small rivers down the streets. Ethan lay in bed, listening to rain hammer against his window while thunder rumbled overhead. His thoughts kept returning to Maple, alone in the shed during the tempest. Just after midnight, a particularly violent thunderclap shook the house. Ethan sat up in bed, heart racing. He couldn't explain it, but something felt wrong. Without thinking twice, he slipped out of bed and pulled on his rain boots and jacket. The house was dark and quiet, his father and grandmother long asleep. Ethan crept down the stairs, wincing at every creak of the old wooden floorboards. He grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slipped out the back door into the deluge. The rain was coming down in sheets, immediately soaking through his pajamas despite the jacket. Wind whipped his hair as he splashed across the yard, mud sucking at his boots. The beam of his flashlight bounced wildly, barely cutting through the darkness. When Ethan reached the shed, he noticed the door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. Fear gripped him. Had Maple left? Was she out in this storm? He pulled the door open wider and shined his light inside. What he saw made him gasp. Maple was still there, but she was clearly in distress. She lay on her side in the nest he'd made, her breathing rapid and shallow. Her eyes, usually alert, seemed unfocused with pain. "Maple?" Ethan whispered, stepping inside and closing the door against the storm. "What's wrong?" As he moved closer, he realized what was happening. Maple was giving birth. Panic welled up in him. He didn't know anything about helping an animal give birth. Should he run for Grandma? But that would mean leaving Maple alone, and somehow he knew she needed him to stay. "It's okay," he said, trying to sound calmer than he felt. "I'm here. You're going to be fine." Maple's eyes found his, and he could have sworn he saw recognition there, maybe even relief. Ethan set the flashlight on a shelf, pointing it toward the nest to provide some light, and knelt a short distance away, not wanting to frighten her further. A sound at the window made Ethan jump. He turned to see another raccoon, larger with distinctive gray markings around its eyes, peering in through the glass. For a moment, Ethan feared the newcomer might be aggressive, but there was something almost concerned in its posture. To Ethan's astonishment, the window, which had been stuck shut for years, suddenly slid open a few inches. The male raccoon squeezed through the gap and approached Maple's nest with cautious steps. Instead of attacking or running away, Maple seemed to relax slightly at his arrival. "You know each other?" Ethan whispered, amazed. The male raccoon positioned himself behind Maple, nuzzling her neck in what looked remarkably like comfort. Then he looked directly at Ethan, and in that gaze was an unmistakable intelligence that sent shivers down the boy's spine. For the next 2 hours, Ethan witnessed a miracle. He sat quietly, occasionally whispering encouragement as Maple delivered 4 tiny, blind kits. The male raccoon stayed close, seemingly helping in ways Ethan couldn't understand. When the final kit emerged, Maple began cleaning them methodically while the male raccoon kept watch. "You're a daddy," Ethan told the male raccoon, who chittered softly in response. Once the kits were nursing, Ethan slowly approached. To his surprise, neither adult raccoon showed aggression. Maple even shifted slightly, as if inviting him to see her babies better. "They're beautiful," Ethan said, tears mixing with the rainwater on his cheeks. One kit in particular caught his eye, the smallest of the four, with a distinctive pink tinge to its tiny nose. "I'll call that one Rosie," he decided. The storm had passed by the time Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. Dawn would break soon, and he needed to get back to his bed before his family woke. He arranged fresh towels around the new family and left extra food and water. "I'll be back later," he promised, giving Maple one last look before slipping out into the damp, pre-dawn air. Ethan was so exhausted that he didn't notice the mud he tracked through the kitchen, nor did he remember to hang up his soaking wet jacket. He barely managed to change into dry pajamas before collapsing into bed, falling instantly into a deep sleep filled with dreams of tiny paws and blind newborn faces. He was awakened 3 hours later by his father's stern voice. "Ethan James Thompson." "Would you care to explain why your rain jacket is soaking wet and there's mud all over the kitchen floor?" Ethan blinked awake to find his father standing in the doorway holding the dripping jacket with 2 fingers. Robert Thompson's face wore the weary expression of a man with too many problems to count, and his son's midnight excursion was clearly one problem too many. I heard something outside," Ethan stammered, his sleep-deprived brain struggling to form a convincing lie. "I thought maybe a branch fell on the shed." Robert's expression softened slightly. "Next time, wake me up. It's not safe for you to go out in a storm like that alone." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Get dressed. You're late for school, and I need to get to work. I can't afford to lose any more hours." As his father turned to leave, Ethan noticed dark circles under his eyes that seemed to have deepened overnight. A wave of guilt washed over him. His father was working so hard, and here he was causing more problems. "Dad?" Ethan called out impulsively. "I'm sorry about the mud." Robert paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "It's just mud, son. The house has seen worse." Something in his father's voice, a hint of the warmth that had been missing for months, gave Ethan hope. At breakfast, Martha gave Ethan knowing looks but said nothing about his nighttime adventure. Instead, she placed extra food on his plate, seemingly aware of his exhaustion. "I might need some old blankets for a project," Ethan told her quietly, while his father was in the bathroom. Martha nodded. "Check the linen closet. There are some we don't use anymore." Ethan was nearly out the door for school when a loud voice from next door caught his attention. "Disgraceful." "Absolutely disgraceful." Theodore Harrison stood on his pristine lawn, gesturing angrily at a series of small paw prints that crossed his manicured grass. "Robert," he called, spotting Ethan's father locking the front door, "you need to do something about these vermin. They were all over my property last night." Robert looked tired. "Good morning to you too, Ted. What seems to be the problem?" "Raccoons!" Harrison spat the word like a curse. "Destructive little thieves. They knocked over my bird feeder and dug up my wife's flower beds. This development was supposed to be free of such nuisances." Ethan froze, his backpack suddenly heavy on his shoulders. Was Harrison talking about Maple and her mate? "It's been raining for days, Ted," Robert replied calmly. "All sorts of wildlife get displaced during storms. I'm sure they'll move on." Harrison's face reddened. "They'd better, or I'll call animal control myself. I pay too much in property taxes to share my yard with rabid trash pandas." Ethan felt a surge of protective anger. "They're not trash pandas," he blurted before he could stop himself. "They're intelligent animals just trying to survive." Both men turned to look at him in surprise. Ethan rarely spoke up these days, especially to adults. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Is that so, young man? And when did you become a wildlife expert?" Robert placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You'll be late for school, son. We can discuss wildlife another time." His gentle pressure guided Ethan toward the waiting school bus. As Ethan boarded the bus, he glanced back to see Harrison watching him with suspicious eyes. A chill ran down his spine. Somehow, he knew that Harrison would be a problem. The man hated anything that disturbed his perfect world. and a family of raccoons definitely qualified as a disturbance. All day at school, Ethan struggled to focus. His mind kept returning to Maple, her new kits, and the surprising appearance of the male raccoon. When the final bell rang, he raced home, barely acknowledging his grandmother as he dropped his backpack and headed straight for the shed. To his relief, the raccoon family was still there, all 6 of them nestled together in the expanded nest of towels and blankets he'd prepared. The kits were nursing, their tiny bodies wriggling against their mother. "You're still here," Ethan breathed, settling down cross-legged near the nest. Maple looked up at him, her eyes somehow conveying both gratitude and wariness. The male raccoon, whom Ethan decided to name Oak, sat protectively nearby, watching Ethan's every move. For the next hour, Ethan sat quietly with the raccoon family, talking softly about his day, his worries about Harrison, and his excitement about the kits. As he was preparing to leave, he heard the shed door open behind him. "So this is what's been keeping you so busy," Martha said, stepping inside. Ethan jumped. "Grandma, I was just visiting your friends," Martha finished for him, kneeling down with some difficulty to get a better look. "My goodness, she had her babies." "Last night, during the storm," Ethan confirmed. "And look, the daddy came to help." He pointed to Oak, who was regarding Martha with cautious interest. Martha's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual. Male raccoons don't typically stay with the mother and kits." She studied the pair thoughtfully. "These two have a bond, and they're both comfortable around humans. Too comfortable. I'm more convinced than ever that they were pets at some point." "Is that bad?" Ethan asked. "It complicates things," Martha replied. "Wild animals that lose their fear of humans often don't fare well, and if Mr. Harrison has noticed raccoons in the neighborhood—" She didn't finish the thought, but her worried expression said enough. "We can't let anything happen to them," Ethan insisted. Martha placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We'll do our best, Ethan. But you need to understand. These animals need to be wild to survive. The kindest thing we can do is help them get back to that state." Ethan looked at Maple, remembering how she'd let him approach her newborns, how she seemed to trust him. The thought of her becoming wild and distant again made his chest ache. But something in his grandmother's voice told him she was right. "What do we do?" he asked softly. "For now, we keep your father from finding out while we figure out a plan," Martha replied. "And we learn everything we can about properly caring for raccoons. No more jerky," she added with a knowing smile. As they walked back to the house together, neither of them noticed Theodore Harrison watching from his upstairs window, binoculars in hand, his face set in a grim expression of vindication. The days following the birth of Maple's kits fell into a rhythm that gave Ethan's life a purpose he'd been missing since his mother died. Each morning, he woke early to check on the raccoon family before school. During lunch breaks, he sketched the kits from memory, documenting their rapid growth. Afternoons were devoted to research and careful observation, with Martha occasionally joining him, bringing her wisdom and practical knowledge. "They're getting so big already," Ethan remarked one afternoon, 2 weeks after the birth. The kits' eyes had opened, revealing bright, curious gazes that explored their small world with increasing awareness. "Raccoons develop quickly," Martha explained, watching as Rosie, the smallest kit with the pink-tinged nose, attempted to climb over her siblings. "They'll be ready to leave the nest in about 8 to 9 weeks. The thought of them leaving created a hollow feeling in Ethan's chest. "Do they have to go?" Martha's weathered hand squeezed his shoulder. "Everything wild must follow its nature, Ethan. That's the hardest lesson to learn when you love something." Over the following weeks, Ethan watched in fascination as each kit developed a distinct personality. Rosie was the adventurous one, always first to try new things. The largest kit, whom Ethan named Bandit for the distinctive mask-like markings around his eyes, was cautious and protective of his siblings. Scout, with her curious nature, was constantly exploring the confines of the shed. The fourth kit, the quietest of the group, Ethan called Shadow for his tendency to follow Maple closely, rarely venturing far from her side. Oak, the father raccoon, came and went mysteriously. Sometimes he'd be absent for days, but he always returned, often bringing small objects that he presented to Maple, a shiny bottle cap, a smooth pebble, once even a lost earring that Ethan recognized as belonging to Mrs. Peterson 3 houses down. "He's bringing her gifts," Ethan told his grandmother excitedly, "like Dad used to bring Mom flowers." Martha observed this behavior with growing interest. "I've never seen anything like it. Wild male raccoons don't typically behave this way." She picked up the earring carefully. "We should return this to Mrs. Peterson anonymously," she added with a wink. As Ethan's connection with the raccoon family deepened, he began to notice subtle communications between them. Maple would make specific chittering sounds when feeding her kits, different from the purring noise she made when grooming them. Oak had a distinct bark-like call he used when returning to the shed. The kits themselves developed unique vocalizations that Ethan began to recognize. Rosie's excited squeaks when she accomplished something new, Bandit's warning growl when strangers approached the shed. One afternoon, Ethan was sitting quietly sketching the kits when Maple did something extraordinary. She picked up Rosie by the scruff of her neck and deliberately placed her in Ethan's lap. The boy froze, hardly daring to breathe as the small kit squirmed and then settled against him, her tiny heart racing against his palm. "She trusts me," Ethan whispered, tears welling in his eyes. That evening, while helping Martha prepare dinner, Ethan could barely contain his excitement. "Maple let me hold Rosie today. She actually put her in my lap herself." Martha paused in chopping carrots, her expression a mixture of wonder and concern. "That's remarkable, Ethan, and worrying." "Worrying? Why?" "Because wild mothers protect their young fiercely from humans. Maple's behavior shows just how domesticated she once was." Martha sighed. "It makes me wonder about her story, how she ended up pregnant and alone in our shed." Ethan had wondered the same thing. In his imagination, Maple had been someone's beloved pet until they couldn't care for her anymore. Perhaps they'd thought releasing her was kinder than taking her to a shelter. They couldn't have known she was pregnant, couldn't have anticipated the spring storms that nearly took her life. As Ethan helped set the table, his father's truck pulled into the driveway. Robert entered looking more exhausted than usual, his construction uniform covered in dust and his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Everything okay, Dad?" Ethan asked, noting the unusual tension in his father's shoulders. Robert forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a long day, buddy. The foreman cut our hours again. Said the project's over budget." He washed his hands at the sink, the water running gray with concrete dust. "How was school?" "Good," Ethan replied automatically, though school had become merely something to endure between visits to Maple. "We're learning about ecosystems in science class. Is that right?" Robert's tone was distracted as he scanned through the mail Martha had placed on the counter. He paused at an official-looking envelope, his expression darkening as he opened it. Martha and Ethan exchanged glances as Robert's face paled slightly. "Everything all right, son?" Martha asked, placing the casserole on the table. "Fine," Robert said quickly, stuffing the letter into his pocket. "Just another bill." Dinner was a quiet affair, with Robert lost in thought and answering questions with single words. After helping clear the dishes, Ethan retreated to his room to finish homework, but his mind kept returning to his father's worried face and the mysterious letter. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan crept downstairs for a glass of water. Voices from the living room stopped him halfway, his father and grandmother talking in hushed, urgent tones. "Third notice, Mom." "I don't know how much longer we can hold them off." "There must be something we can do," Martha replied. Have you looked into refinancing? With my credit after Sarah's medical bills? Robert's bitter laugh held no humor. No bank will touch us. I'm working every hour they'll give me, but construction's slow and the medical debt collectors don't care. What about your old position with Wildlife Services? Have you considered going back? A heavy silence followed. They filled my position months ago. Besides, that department's facing budget cuts too. Everyone's tightening belts. We could sell some things, Martha suggested. I have a few pieces of jewelry. No, Mom. You've done enough moving in here. I'll figure something out. The weariness in Robert's voice made him sound decades older. But we might need to consider downsizing. The Parkview apartments have 2 bedrooms available. Ethan's heart sank. Apartments wouldn't allow pets, and certainly not wild raccoons. Just when he'd found something to care about again, it seemed the world was conspiring to take it away. The next morning, Ethan visited the shed with a heavier heart. The kits were growing more active, playing and wrestling with each other under Maple's watchful eye. Oak was absent, probably on one of his mysterious excursions. We might have to move, Ethan told Maple, who watched him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word. Dad's having money problems. I heard him talking to Grandma last night. Rosie tumbled over to him, batting at his shoelaces with tiny paws. Despite his worries, Ethan couldn't help smiling. He gently stroked her soft fur, marveling at how much she'd grown in just 3 weeks. I don't know what will happen to you guys if we leave, he continued, his throat tightening. Mr. Harrison already wants to call animal control. At the neighboring property, as if summoned by the mention of his name, Theodore Harrison emerged onto his back deck. Ethan instinctively ducked lower in the shed, pulling the door nearly closed. Through the crack, he watched as Harrison surveyed his immaculate yard with proprietary satisfaction. The man's gaze lingered on the Thompsons' shed, his expression hardening. Harrison descended the deck steps and approached the property line, his polished loafers incongruous against the dew-damp grass. He seemed to be inspecting something, small tracks in the soft earth near the fence. Raccoon tracks. Ethan held his breath as Harrison followed the tracks with his eyes, his gaze eventually settling directly on the shed. For a terrifying moment, Ethan thought the man would march over and fling open the door, exposing the raccoon family. Instead, Harrison pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking too quietly for Ethan to hear. When Harrison returned to his house, Ethan exhaled shakily. Something told him their secret wouldn't stay secret much longer. At school that day, during library period, Ethan bypassed his usual wildlife books and headed for the computers instead. With determination born of desperation, he searched for information about local wildlife laws, raccoon rehabilitation, and what happened to animals taken by animal control. The results were discouraging. In most cases, raccoons considered nuisance wildlife were euthanized, especially if they showed signs of habituation to humans. During lunch, while other kids chatted about video games and weekend plans, Ethan sat alone sketching Maple and her kits, adding fine details from memory. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice the shadow falling across his table until a voice broke his concentration. "That's really good. You're quite the artist." Ethan looked up to find his science teacher, Mrs. Wilson, examining his drawing with genuine interest. "Thanks," he mumbled, instinctively moving to cover the sketch. "No, really," she insisted. "You've captured a lot of detail. Is this from observation or imagination?" Something in her kind tone made Ethan hesitate. "Kind of both," he admitted cautiously. Mrs. Wilson sat down across from him. "You know, I have a friend who works in wildlife conservation. She'd be impressed by your attention to detail." Ethan's interest piqued. "A wildlife conservationist? Here in Oak Ridge?" "She just arrived recently. The town hired her to assess our local wildlife situation. Apparently, there have been some complaints." Ms. Wilson smiled. "Her name's Amelia Parker. She's actually giving a presentation to our class next week." That afternoon, Ethan practically ran home from the bus stop, bursting with this new information. A wildlife conservationist in Oak Ridge could be exactly what they needed, someone who would understand Maple's unique situation and help protect her family. His excitement was short-lived. As he approached his house, Ethan saw a white truck with Oak Ridge Animal Control emblazoned on the side, parked in front of Mr. Harrison's home. His neighbor stood in the driveway, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to a uniformed officer. Ethan slowed his pace, straining to hear their conversation. "Definitely raccoons," Harrison was saying. "I've seen the tracks all over, and my surveillance camera caught 2 adults crossing my property last night." The animal control officer, a bored-looking man in his 40s, nodded mechanically. "We'll set some live traps, Mr. Harrison. If we catch anything, we'll remove them according to protocol." "And what exactly is the protocol?" Harrison pressed. The officer's response made Ethan's blood run cold. "County regulations require that nuisance raccoons be euthanized. They can't be relocated due to disease concerns." Panic rising in his chest, Ethan hurried past, hoping neither man would notice him. He had to warn Martha, had to protect Maple and her family somehow. But as he rushed up his driveway, a new vehicle turning onto their street caught his attention. A green SUV with a logo on the door that read Oak Ridge Wildlife Management. A tall woman with auburn hair pulled into a practical ponytail stepped out, consulting a tablet. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though Ethan was certain he'd never met her. She glanced up, catching him staring, and offered a friendly smile. "Hello there," she called. "I'm looking for the Thompson residence. Would that be here?" "That's us," Ethan replied cautiously. "I'm Ethan Thompson." The woman approached, extending her hand. "Amelia Parker, Wildlife Management. Nice to meet you, Ethan." "Is your father home?" "He's at work," Ethan said, shaking her hand. "My grandmother's inside, though." As if on cue, Martha opened the front door. "Ethan, who are you talking to?" She stopped short at the sight of the official-looking visitor. "Mrs. Thompson? I'm Amelia Parker. I was hoping to speak with your family about some wildlife concerns in the neighborhood." Martha's eyes darted briefly to the shed before she composed her features into a welcoming smile. "Of course, dear. Why don't you come in for some tea?" As they walked inside, Ethan caught another glimpse of Harrison and the animal control officer. They were now examining a map of the neighborhood, with Harrison pointing directly at the Thompson property. The race to save Maple had officially begun, and Ethan wasn't sure they were on the winning side. "So, you see, Mrs. Thompson, we've had multiple reports of raccoon activity in the neighborhood," Amelia Parker explained, warming her hands around the mug of tea Martha had provided. "Normally, we'd just let them be. They're part of the ecosystem after all, but when they start frequenting residential areas, it becomes a public health concern." Martha nodded thoughtfully, her eyes briefly meeting Ethan's across the kitchen table. "And what exactly happens to these raccoons when you find them, Ms. Parker?" "Please, call me Amelia," she said with a smile that transformed her serious face. "And that depends on several factors: their health, behavior patterns, whether they've been habituated to humans." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "Unfortunately, in most cases, county protocol requires euthanasia." Ethan couldn't contain himself any longer. "That's not fair. They're just trying to survive." Amelia studied him with interest. "You seem to know a bit about raccoons, Ethan." "We've been studying ecosystems in science class," Martha interjected smoothly. "Ethan's always been passionate about animals. Takes after his father that way." "His father?" Amelia raised an eyebrow. "Robert was a wildlife officer before he switched to construction. Martha explained, her voice softening. Medical bills. You know how it is. Something flickered across Amelia's face. Recognition, perhaps, or sympathy. Robert Thompson. I think I may have heard that name during my department orientation. Well respected in the field, as I recall. Ethan seized the opening. If my dad was still a wildlife officer, he wouldn't let anyone hurt innocent animals just for living near humans. Amelia set down her mug, regarding Ethan with newfound respect. You know, you're absolutely right. The best wildlife officers understand that coexistence is always preferable to elimination. Unfortunately, not everyone in this neighborhood shares that perspective. You mean Mr. Harrison? Ethan said flatly. A wry smile crossed Amelia's face. I don't think I mentioned any names. You didn't have to, Martha sighed. Theodore Harrison has made his feelings about wildlife abundantly clear. He considers anything not on a leash or in a cage to be a nuisance. Amelia nodded, then leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Thompson, Ethan, may I speak frankly? At their nods, she continued, her voice lower. I'm not here just to trap raccoons. Oak Ridge hired me to develop a comprehensive wildlife management plan that balances ecological needs with human concerns. What some residents want, particularly Mr. Harrison, and what's best for the ecosystem aren't always aligned. Hope flickered in Ethan's chest. So you won't hurt the raccoons? Not if there's a better solution, Amelia assured him. But I need to assess the situation first. If you've noticed raccoon activity in your yard or nearby, it would be helpful to know details. How many, how often, any unusual behaviors. Ethan and Martha exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Martha gave an almost imperceptible nod. Actually, Ethan began hesitantly, we know exactly where they are. Before Amelia could respond, the front door opened, and Robert Thompson's tired voice called out, I'm home. Car's making that noise again, Mom. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, stopping short at the sight of their visitor. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize we had company. Dad, Ethan said, jumping up. This is Ms. Parker. She's a wildlife conservationist. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly as he extended his hand. Robert Thompson, nice to meet you. Amelia Parker, she replied, shaking his hand. I was just discussing the local wildlife situation with your family. I understand you used to be in the field yourself. A lifetime ago, Robert said with a self-deprecating smile that didn't reach his eyes. He glanced at Ethan and Martha. What's this about? Martha stood up. Why don't you sit down, Robert? I think we all need to have a conversation. For the next few minutes, Martha carefully explained about Maple and her kits, how Ethan had been caring for them, and their concerns about Harrison's complaints. Throughout the explanation, Robert's expression shifted from surprise to concern to something approaching anger. You've been keeping wild raccoons in our shed? He asked Ethan, his voice strained with the effort of remaining calm. For weeks? Without telling me? I was going to, Ethan said, his voice small. But then the babies came and I was afraid you'd make me get rid of them. Of course I would have, Robert exploded, then immediately moderated his tone. Ethan, raccoons can carry diseases. They can be unpredictable. What were you thinking? He was thinking with his heart, Martha said gently. Just like his mother would have. Just like you used to. Robert fell silent, the mention of Sarah seeming to deflate his anger. Amelia, who had been observing the family dynamics with keen interest, spoke up. Mr. Thompson, if I may, I'd like to see these raccoons myself before any decisions are made. From what your mother and son have described, this situation is unusual. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Ethan recognized well. Fine. Let's all go look at the raccoons my 8-year-old has been secretly keeping. Why not? It's not like I have enough problems already. The sun was beginning its descent as the four of them walked across the backyard to the shed. Robert strode ahead, his back rigid with tension, while Ethan practically jogged to keep up. "Dad," he said breathlessly, "just please don't be mad at them." Maple was hurt and pregnant, and she needed help. Robert glanced down at his son, his expression softening slightly. "Maple? That's what I named her. Because of the marking on her face. It looks like a maple leaf." At the shed, Ethan moved ahead, opening the door slowly. "Maple," he called softly. "It's okay. These people want to help." Inside, the Raccoon family had arranged themselves in what almost looked like a defensive formation. Maple stood at the front, the kits huddled behind her, with Oak positioned at her side. All 6 pairs of eyes gleamed in the dimming light. "My God," Robert breathed. "They're organized." "Extraordinary," Amelia murmured, crouching down to observe them better. "The male is still present. That's highly unusual for raccoons, and they're not displaying normal fear responses to humans." She looked at Ethan. "How long did you say you've been caring for them?" "About 6 weeks now," Ethan replied. "Since before the kits were born." "May I?" Amelia gestured toward the Raccoon family. Ethan nodded, then spoke directly to Maple. "It's okay. She's a friend." To everyone's amazement, except Ethan's, Maple seemed to relax slightly, though she remained protective of her kits. Amelia moved forward slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She stopped a respectful distance away, observing without touching. "These aren't typical wild raccoons," she concluded after several minutes. "The female, Maple, shows signs of previous domestication. The male, too, though to a lesser extent." "You mean they were pets?" Robert asked. "Almost certainly," Amelia confirmed. "Released or escaped, I'd guess. Which explains their comfort around humans and the male's unusual attachment to the family unit." She turned to Ethan. "You've done a remarkable job caring for them." Many rehabilitators wouldn't have managed better. Pride swelled in Ethan's chest at the compliment, especially when he caught his father's surprised glance. "So what happens now?" Robert asked, his voice carefully neutral. Amelia stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "Legally, I should remove them. Previously domesticated raccoons aren't considered suitable for release back into the wild, and keeping them as pets is against state regulations." Ethan's heart sank. "But you can't take them. Maple trusts me." "I said legally. That's what should happen," Amelia clarified with a small smile. "But there are alternatives. There's a wildlife rehabilitation center about 40 miles from here that specializes in cases like this. They have the facilities to properly care for raccoons that can't be fully released back into the wild." "Would they stay together?" Ethan asked anxiously. "I believe so. It's better for their welfare, especially the kits." Amelia turned to Robert. "The center operates on donations and grants. They're always looking for volunteers with wildlife experience." Something shifted in Robert's expression, a flicker of interest quickly suppressed. "That's good to know." "But we can't move them yet," Amelia continued. "The kits are still too young. They need at least another month with their mother in a stable environment." "A month?" Robert sounded skeptical. "Ted Harrison is already calling animal control. They were here today." "Leave Harrison to me," Amelia said with surprising firmness. "I have jurisdiction over wildlife matters in Oak Ridge now. But," she added, looking directly at Ethan, "you'll need to be more careful. No more outdoor feeding. And we'll need to make some modifications to keep them safer and less visible." Hope bloomed in Ethan's chest. "So they can stay? For now?" "For now," Amelia agreed. "But there's something else you should know." Her expression grew serious. "There's a town meeting next week about wildlife management in Oak Ridge. Harrison is pushing for aggressive removal policies for all nuisance wildlife. If his proposal passes, my hands will be tied." Robert's jaw tightened. Ted's always been good at getting his way in this town. Perhaps, Amelia acknowledged. But he's never gone up against a unified community before, and he's never faced someone who knows exactly how he operates. Something in her tone made Ethan wonder if there was more to her knowledge of Harrison than professional awareness. As they walked back to the house, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard, Robert fell into step beside Ethan. "You named her Maple, huh?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," Ethan replied, uncertain of his father's mood. "Because of the marking, and the kits are Rosie, Bandit, Scout, and Shadow." Robert was silent for a moment. "Your mother would have done the same thing," he finally said. "She was always bringing home strays. Drove me crazy sometimes." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But it was one of the things I loved most about her." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. It had been months since his father had spoken so openly about his mother. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," Ethan said. "I was afraid you'd be mad." "I'm not mad, Ethan. I'm worried. Taking care of wild animals is complicated, even for professionals." Robert sighed. "But I understand why you did it. I just wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me." Before Ethan could respond, a sharp voice cut through the evening air. "Well, well, what a cozy little gathering." Theodore Harrison stood at the property line, his arms crossed over his chest. His gaze swept over the group, lingering with particular interest on Amelia. "Miss Parker, isn't it? I was told you'd be addressing the raccoon problem." His smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "I didn't realize your job involved social calls." Amelia straightened, her professional demeanor sliding into place. "Mr. Harrison, I'm conducting a comprehensive assessment of wildlife patterns in the neighborhood. That includes speaking with all affected residents." "And what have you determined about the Thompson raccoon infestation?" Harrison pressed. "There's no infestation, Mr. Harrison," Amelia replied coolly. "Just a local wildlife presence that's being properly monitored." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "I see. Well, I look forward to discussing your assessment at the town meeting next week. I'm sure the council will be interested in your professional opinion." The emphasis he placed on professional carried a subtle threat. As Harrison turned to leave, he paused, studying Amelia more closely. "You know, you look familiar somehow. Have we met before?" A tense silence fell as Amelia met his gaze steadily. "I don't believe so, Mr. Harrison." "I have one of those faces, I suppose." Harrison seemed unconvinced but nodded curtly before walking back to his house. "Well," Martha said once he was out of earshot, "that man could curdle fresh milk with that glare." Amelia's composed expression had slipped, revealing something that looked almost like pain before she quickly recovered. "He's certainly passionate about his position." "That's one word for it," Robert muttered. Back inside the house, Amelia provided them with her contact information and promised to return tomorrow with supplies to make the shed more secure and comfortable for the raccoon family. As she prepared to leave, she pulled Ethan aside. "You've done something special connecting with Maple like that," she told him. "But the hardest part of loving wild things is knowing when to let them go. Remember that, okay?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "I just want what's best for them." "I know you do," Amelia smiled. "That's what makes you special." After Amelia left, the Thompson family sat down to a delayed dinner. The usual silence was replaced by animated discussion about the raccoons, the upcoming town meeting, and Harrison's obvious displeasure. "I don't understand why he hates animals so much," Ethan said, pushing peas around his plate. "What did they ever do to him?" "Some people just can't stand anything they can't control," Martha observed. "Nature doesn't follow Theodore Harrison's rules, and that bothers him." Robert, who had been unusually thoughtful throughout dinner, suddenly spoke up. "I knew I recognized Amelia Parker from somewhere." She wrote several papers on urban wildlife management that we used to reference in the department. She's highly respected in the field. She seemed to know a lot about raccoons, Ethan agreed. More than that, Robert continued, she has a reputation for finding balanced solutions where others see only conflict. Oak Ridge was lucky to get her. He paused, then added more quietly, though I'm not sure she's entirely comfortable around Harrison. Did you notice how he looked at her? Martha asked, almost like he was trying to place her. And how she reacted? Robert nodded. There's history there, I'd bet on it. Later that night, as Ethan prepared for bed, his father knocked on his open door. Got a minute? Robert asked, holding something behind his back. Sure, Dad. Robert entered and sat on the edge of Ethan's bed. I wanted to show you something. He revealed what he'd been hiding, a worn, leather-bound journal. This was your mother's. She kept records of all the animals she helped over the years. Ethan took the journal reverently, opening it to find pages filled with his mother's handwriting, accompanied by small, precise sketches of various animals, birds with broken wings, an orphaned fawn, even a fox kit. Mom drew these? Ethan asked, tracing a finger over a detailed illustration of a barred owl. She did. She was talented, just like you. Robert's voice grew soft. She believed every creature deserved compassion, deserved a chance. It used to drive me crazy sometimes. Our bathroom turned into a bird hospital, our garage housing a family of opossums. He laughed softly at the memory. But she taught me to see the world differently, to see that we're all connected. Tears pricked at Ethan's eyes. I miss her so much, Dad. Me too, buddy. Every day. Robert put his arm around Ethan's shoulders. I've been so caught up in trying to keep us afloat, in my own grief, that I haven't been there for you the way I should have been. I'm sorry for that. It's okay, Dad. No, it's not. But I'm going to do better. Robert squeezed Ethan's shoulder. Starting with helping you and Amelia figure out what's best for Maple and her family. As his father left, Ethan carefully placed his mother's journal on his nightstand. For the first time in months, he felt a connection to her that wasn't just pain and absence. She would have loved Maple, would have been proud of him for helping. Somehow, that knowledge made everything else, Harrison's threats, the uncertain future, even their financial troubles, seem more manageable. Outside, the moon rose over Oak Ridge, its light spilling through Ethan's window and across the yard to the shed where Maple and her family slept. In the neighboring house, Theodore Harrison sat at his desk, phone in hand, making calls to rally support for the upcoming town meeting. And somewhere across town, Amelia Parker stared at an old photograph hidden in her wallet. A younger version of herself standing beside a smiling Theodore Harrison before everything between them had shattered beyond repair. The town meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the Oak Ridge Community Center, a converted church with high ceilings and wooden pews that had been repurposed as benches. By 6:30, the space was already filling with residents, many of whom Ethan recognized from school events and neighborhood barbecues. Quite a turnout, Martha observed as the Thompson family found seats near the middle. Ted's been busy rallying his troops. She wasn't wrong. Theodore Harrison stood near the front, surrounded by a cluster of well-dressed neighbors from the newer developments, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights as he gestured emphatically. Occasionally, someone in his circle would nod vigorously or cast disapproving glances around the room. Robert, who had taken the evening off work despite the financial hit, sat stiffly beside Ethan. He'd traded his construction clothes for a button-down shirt that looked like it hadn't been worn in months. This isn't just about raccoons, he murmured to Martha. Harrison's using this as a platform for his broader development agenda. Ethan barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the small podium at the front where Amelia Parker stood reviewing her notes. In the 4 days since her visit to their home, she'd been to the shed twice more, bringing specialized food for the raccoons and helping Ethan make the space more secure and comfortable. She'd shown him how to gradually reduce Maple's dependence on human food, explained the natural behaviors they should be encouraging in the kits, and answered his endless questions with patience and respect. "Do you think they'll listen to her?" Ethan asked his father, anxiety tightening his chest. Robert followed his gaze to Amelia. "Some will. Others have already made up their minds." He hesitated, then added, "But sometimes one voice is all it takes to change the conversation." The meeting was called to order by Mayor Wilson, a portly man with a booming voice who seemed eager to move proceedings along. "Folks, we've got one main item on the agenda tonight: Oak Ridge's wildlife management plan. As you know, we've hired Ms. Amelia Parker as our wildlife consultant to help us address concerns about increasing animal activity in residential areas." Harrison's hand shot up immediately. "Before Ms. Parker presents, I'd like to make a statement on behalf of the Oak Ridge Property Owners Association." The mayor nodded, though Ethan thought he looked slightly annoyed at the interruption. "Keep it brief, Ted. We've got a full agenda." Harrison approached the podium with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Friends and neighbors, our community is facing a growing problem. Raccoons, opossums, and other vermin are invading our properties, destroying our gardens, spreading disease, and threatening our children's safety." Ethan clenched his fists at the word vermin. Maple wasn't vermin. She was smart and gentle and protective of her babies. "Just last month," Harrison continued, "the Petersons' dog was attacked by a raccoon. Mrs. Abernathy found raccoon droppings on her patio furniture. The Wilsons' garbage cans were repeatedly overturned." Martha leaned over to Robert. "That dog chased the raccoon first. The Abernathys leave food out overnight, and the Wilsons don't secure their trash properly," she whispered. "Convenient how he leaves those details out." "Our property values are at stake," Harrison was saying, his voice rising with practiced indignation. "Our safety is at stake. I propose that Oak Ridge adopt a zero-tolerance policy for wildlife in residential areas. Any raccoons, opossums, or other nuisance animals should be immediately removed and euthanized as per county protocol." A murmur ran through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others frowning in concern. "Furthermore," Harrison added, glancing pointedly at the Thompson family, "we must address the issue of residents who are attracting wildlife by feeding them, either deliberately or through improper waste management." Ethan felt his face grow hot as several heads turned in their direction. "Thank you, Ted," Mayor Wilson said, reclaiming the podium. "Now let's hear from our wildlife expert. Ms. Parker?" Amelia approached the front with calm professionalism, though Ethan noticed a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Thank you, Mayor Wilson. Good evening, everyone." Her voice was clear and steady. "I've spent the past 2 weeks conducting a comprehensive assessment of wildlife activity in Oak Ridge, and I'd like to share my findings and recommendations." She began with a presentation of facts: species present in the area, natural patterns of movement, ecological benefits of local wildlife, before addressing specific concerns. "Regarding the incidents Mr. Harrison mentioned," she said, her tone neutral but firm, "context is important. Wildlife doesn't invade. It adapts to changing environments we've created by expanding our developments into their habitats." Harrison shifted visibly in his seat. "The good news," Amelia continued, "is that coexistence is entirely possible with minimal inconvenience to residents. Simple measures like secure garbage containers, removing outdoor pet food at night, and proper garden fencing can dramatically reduce unwanted wildlife interactions." She outlined a 3-tier plan for Oak Ridge: education for residents, habitat modifications to encourage wildlife to stay in woodland areas, and humane deterrence for properties experiencing persistent issues. "What about removal?" Harrison called out, not waiting to be recognized. "Your plan doesn't address the animals already causing problems." Amelia met his gaze steadily. "Removal is rarely effective long-term, Mr. Harrison. Nature abhors a vacuum. Remove one family of raccoons and another moves in to claim the territory. The solution isn't elimination, it's adaptation." "So we should just accept living alongside disease-carrying pests?" Harrison countered. "The disease risk from wildlife is vastly overstated," Amelia replied. "With proper precautions, it's minimal. Far less, statistically speaking, than the risk from domestic pets." The debate continued, with Harrison growing increasingly agitated as Amelia calmly countered each of his points with scientific evidence. Ethan watched in fascination, sensing the room's mood gradually shifting toward Amelia's more balanced approach. Then Harrison played what he clearly thought was his trump card. "Ms. Parker," he said, his voice cutting through the discussion, "isn't it true that you have a personal interest in protecting these animals? That your professional judgment might be compromised by your personal history?" A hush fell over the room. Amelia's composed expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "My recommendations are based on scientific data and best practices in wildlife management," she stated. "My personal feelings about animals don't override my professional ethics." "That's not what I meant," Harrison pressed, a cold smile playing at his lips. "I'm referring to your personal history with this community, or should I say, with me specifically." The mayor frowned. "Ted, what are you getting at?" Harrison turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, what Ms. Parker hasn't disclosed is that she's my daughter." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Ethan's mouth fell open in shock as he turned to look at his father and grandmother, who appeared equally stunned. Amelia stood rigid at the podium, her knuckles white where she gripped the edges. "That's hardly relevant to this discussion," she said, her voice tightly controlled. "Isn't it?" Harrison challenged. "You've returned to Oak Ridge after 15 years with an agenda to undermine everything I've worked for. This isn't about wildlife. It's about revenge." "That's enough, Ted," Mayor Wilson interrupted, but Harrison wasn't finished. "The council should know that Mrs. Parker abandoned her family, rejected our values, and now returns as some self-proclaimed expert to tell us how to live. Can we really trust her judgment?" The room erupted in shocked conversations. Amelia remained at the podium, her face pale but composed, refusing to engage with Harrison's personal attack. Ethan felt sick. He looked to his father, expecting to see the same discomfort, but instead found Robert rising to his feet. "Point of order, Mayor Wilson," Robert called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Mr. Harrison's personal grievances have no place in this discussion. We're here to talk about wildlife management, not family disputes." Several voices murmured in agreement. "Furthermore," Robert continued, gaining confidence, "as a former wildlife officer with the State Department, I can attest that Mrs. Parker's recommendations align perfectly with current best practices. Her personal connection to Mr. Harrison, whatever it may be, doesn't change the science." Ethan stared at his father in amazement. It had been so long since he'd seen this side of him, the confident professional who spoke with authority on subjects he knew well. Mayor Wilson nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You're absolutely right." He turned to Harrison. "Ted, keep your comments relevant to the wildlife issue or yield the floor." Harrison's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, an unexpected voice spoke up from the back of the room. "I'd like to say something, if I may." Heads turned to see Martha Thompson slowly rising to her feet, her aged but dignified presence commanding attention. For those who don't know me, I'm Martha Thompson. I've lived in Oak Ridge for over 40 years, long before most of these developments existed. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly. I've watched this town change from a place where people and nature lived in balance to one where we seem to view wildlife as the enemy. She looked around the room, making eye contact with various residents. The raccoons, the deer, the foxes, they were here first. We're the intruders, not them. And yet we expect them to adapt instantly to our presence, to disappear when convenient, as if they haven't lived here for generations before us. Ethan felt a surge of pride as his grandmother continued. My late daughter, Ethan's mother, taught science at Oak Ridge Elementary for 15 years. She believed that respect for all living things was the most important lesson we could teach our children. Martha's voice wavered slightly. What are we teaching them now? That anything inconvenient should be eliminated? That we have no responsibility to coexist with the natural world? The room had fallen completely silent. I support Miss Parker's plan, Martha concluded. Not just because it's scientifically sound, but because it's the right thing to do. And I believe most of you know that in your hearts, regardless of property values or perfectly manicured lawns. As Martha sat down, spontaneous applause broke out across the room. Ethan noticed that even some of Harrison's supporters were nodding thoughtfully. The meeting continued with residents asking questions and sharing experiences, some supporting Harrison's hardline approach, but many more expressing interest in Amelia's coexistence strategies. Throughout it all, Harrison sat seething, occasionally whispering to his supporters, but not interrupting again. When the mayor finally called for a vote on adopting Amelia's wildlife management plan versus Harrison's removal policy, the result was decisive, 28-12 in favor of Amelia's approach. The ayes have it, Mayor Wilson announced. Miss Parker's wildlife management plan will be implemented immediately. Thank you all for your participation. As the meeting dispersed, Ethan watched Harrison storm out without speaking to anyone, including his daughter. Amelia remained at the front, accepting congratulations and answering additional questions from residents, her professional demeanor firmly back in place despite the personal ordeal she'd just endured. That was quite a revelation, Robert said quietly, as they gathered their things. I had no idea Amelia was Harrison's daughter. It explains a lot, Martha replied. The tension between them, her understanding of his tactics. Do you think she came back to Oak Ridge because of the raccoons or because of him? Ethan wondered. Robert shrugged. Sometimes life brings us full circle for reasons we don't understand until later. As they prepared to leave, Amelia approached their family, her expression a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. Thank you, she said simply. All of you. Your support meant everything. You earned it with facts and science, Robert assured her. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about the bombshell Harrison dropped. Amelia sighed. It's a long, complicated story. My father and I haven't spoken in 15 years, not since I chose wildlife biology over joining the family real estate business. He saw it as a betrayal of everything he valued. And now you're back in Oak Ridge, Martha observed. That can't be coincidence. It wasn't, Amelia admitted. When I saw the job posting, I knew it was his doing, trying to clean up the town for his new developments. I thought maybe I could change his mind, show him another way. She smiled sadly. Naive, I know. Not naive, Robert said. Hopeful. There's a difference. As they walked to the parking lot together, Ethan gathered his courage to ask the question weighing on his mind. What happens to Maple and her family now? Will they be safe? Amelia nodded. They'll be safe. The new management plan protects them from immediate removal. But, she added gently, that doesn't change what we discussed before. They still need to transition to a more natural environment eventually. especially as the kits grow. I know, Ethan said, his throat tight. I just need more time with them. You'll have it, she promised, and I'll help every step of the way. The next morning, Ethan rushed to the shed as soon as he woke, eager to check on Maple and share the good news from the town meeting. But when he opened the door, his heart plummeted. The nest was empty. All 6 raccoons, Maple, Oak, and the 4 kits, were gone. Panic rising in his chest, Ethan searched the shed frantically, calling for Maple. He found a few tufts of fur, some scattered food, but no sign of the raccoon family. The small window that Amelia had modified to allow the raccoons freedom to come and go was open, but something about the scene felt wrong. Too disturbed, too empty. With dread building inside him, Ethan ran to check Harrison's yard. Had the man taken matters into his own hands despite the vote? Near the property line, he found what confirmed his worst fears, a live trap, the kind animal control used, partially hidden behind Harrison's garden shed. Tears blurred Ethan's vision as he ran back to the house, bursting through the door where his father and grandmother were having breakfast. "They're gone!" he cried, his voice breaking. "Maple and all of them! They're gone! And Mr. Harrison has a trap in his yard." Robert was on his feet immediately. "Are you sure they're not just out foraging? Raccoons are nocturnal, Ethan." "The shed looks wrong," Ethan insisted, wiping at his tears. "Like there was a struggle or something. And why would Harrison have a trap after the meeting?" "He's taken them, Dad. I know he has." Martha placed a calming hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Robert, perhaps you should speak with Theodore." "I'll do more than speak with him," Robert said grimly, grabbing his keys. "Ethan, call Amelia. Her number's on the fridge. Tell her what's happened and ask her to meet us at Harrison's." The confrontation that followed would become neighborhood legend in Oak Ridge. Robert Thompson, the quiet construction worker who kept to himself, marched across to Theodore Harrison's immaculate house and pounded on the door with a force that rattled the windows. When Harrison opened the door in his bathrobe, his face registered first surprise, then smug satisfaction. "Thompson, a bit early for a social call, isn't it?" "Where are they?" Robert demanded without preamble. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about." "The raccoons," Robert growled. "My son's raccoons. They're missing, and there's a trap in your yard. After last night's vote, that's not just mean-spirited, it's against the new town ordinance." Harrison's smile was cold. "The new ordinance doesn't take effect until it's filed with the county clerk, which won't happen until Monday. Until then, the existing regulations apply, and they allow for removal of nuisance wildlife." "You had no right," Robert began, but Harrison cut him off. "I had every right to protect my property from disease-carrying vermin, and your son had no right to harbor wild animals that pose a public health risk." Harrison's voice dripped with contempt. "Perhaps if you spent more time parenting and less time indulging childish fantasies, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Something in Robert snapped. Later, he wouldn't remember exactly what Harrison said next, only that it involved Sarah and her bleeding heart nonsense. What he did remember was the satisfying feeling of his fist connecting with Theodore Harrison's perfectly straight nose. Blood spurted from Theodore Harrison's nose as he stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, Robert breathing heavily, Harrison holding a handkerchief to his bleeding nose, before reality crashed back in. "That," Harrison said with cold precision, "was assault. I'm calling the police." Robert's anger drained away, replaced by the sickening realization of what he'd done. He had just punched a man, a prominent community member, on his own doorstep. With his precarious financial situation and Ethan to think about, he couldn't afford legal troubles. "Where are the raccoons, Ted?" Robert asked, his voice now steady but firm. Just tell me that and I'll leave. Animal Control picked them up this morning, Harrison replied, dabbing at his nose. Standard procedure for wildlife removal. I'm sure they've been handled according to protocol by now. Robert's heart sank. Protocol meant euthanasia for raccoons considered nuisance wildlife, especially those habituated to humans. Maple and her family would already be gone. "Dad!" Ethan's voice called from behind. Robert turned to see his son running across the lawn, Amelia Parker close behind him. "Did you find them? Are they okay?" Before Robert could answer, Amelia stepped forward, her gaze moving between the two men and quickly assessing the situation. "Mr. Harrison," she said with professional detachment, though her eyes flickered to his bloodied nose, "I understand you've reported raccoons for removal despite last night's council decision." "The decision isn't official until Monday," Harrison repeated, the handkerchief muffling his words. "I was well within my rights." Amelia's phone was already in her hand. "Which officer responded? When were they here?" "How should I know? I called the main line." "Some man came in a white truck around dawn." Amelia was dialing before he finished speaking. "Jerry, it's Amelia Parker. Did you send someone to the Harrison property this morning for raccoon removal?" She listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to confusion. "No pickup at all. Are you sure?" Another pause. "Thanks, Jerry. Let me know if you hear anything." She lowered the phone, looking directly at Harrison. "Animal Control has no record of a pickup at this address today. In fact, they haven't done any raccoon removals in Oak Ridge since Wednesday." Harrison's face reddened beneath the handkerchief. "Then it must have been a private contractor. I don't keep track of every detail." "A private contractor would need my authorization to remove wildlife in Oak Ridge," Amelia countered. "None was issued." Her voice hardened. "Mr. Harrison, where are the raccoons?" The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the unexpected arrival of a fourth party. Martha Thompson, moving more quickly than her age suggested possible, approached the group with determination etched on her face. In her arms, she carried a bundle wrapped in an old towel. "I believe," Martha said with surprising strength, "that everyone needs to calm down and think clearly." She shifted the bundle, revealing the smallest of Maple's kits, Rosie, with her distinctive pink-tinged nose, blinking sleepily in the morning light. Ethan gasped. "Rosie, you found her." "She was hiding under the porch steps," Martha explained. "Frightened half to death, poor thing. Wouldn't have found her at all if I hadn't heard her crying." Harrison stared at the kit with undisguised revulsion. "Keep that disease-ridden creature away from me." "Where are the others?" Ethan asked, gently stroking Rosie's head with one finger. "Where's Maple?" Martha shook her head. "No sign of them, I'm afraid." Amelia's gaze remained fixed on Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, I'll ask you one more time. What happened to the adult raccoons and the other kits?" Something in her tone, or perhaps the growing audience of neighbors emerging from their houses to witness the commotion, finally broke Harrison's resistance. "Fine," he snapped. "I hired someone to relocate them, not kill them," he added quickly, seeing Robert's hands clench again. "Just move them somewhere else, far from here." "Who?" Amelia demanded. "Where did they take them?" "Some wildlife guy from the next county over. He said he'd release them in the state forest about 50 miles north." Amelia's face paled. "The state forest? With 4-week-old kits? That's a death sentence, especially with one kit separated from them." She stepped closer to Harrison, her professional demeanor cracking to reveal the fury beneath. "Those raccoons were not fully wild. The kits have never lived outside a sheltered environment. They cannot survive in deep forest without proper transition." Harrison's expression remained unmoved. "Not my problem. They're gone, and good riddance." Ethan felt his world collapsing. Maple and the others were dumped in a strange forest, without Rosie, without adequate preparation. They wouldn't survive. His knees buckled, and he might have fallen if his father hadn't caught him. "We'll find them," Robert promised, though Ethan could hear the doubt in his voice. "Somehow, we'll find them." Amelia was already on her phone again, walking a few paces away to make calls to colleagues in wildlife services. Martha continued to hold Rosie, who had curled into a tight ball in the towel, trembling slightly. "You had no right," Ethan said quietly, looking up at Harrison with tears streaming down his face. "They never hurt anyone. They were just trying to live." Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, discomfort, perhaps, or the faintest trace of shame, before his expression hardened once more. "Animals belong in the wild, boy. Not in human neighborhoods, and certainly not as pets." "They weren't pets," Ethan insisted. "They were friends, and now they're going to die because of you." Harrison turned away, seemingly eager to end the confrontation. "I'm still calling the police about that assault, Thompson," he said over his shoulder, "and I'll be sending you the medical bill for my nose." "Go ahead," Robert replied, his arm still around Ethan's shoulders. "I'll tell them exactly why I hit you." As Harrison retreated into his house, Amelia rejoined the group, her expression grim but determined. "I've got people heading to the state forest now," she reported. "They'll look for signs of recently released raccoons, and I've reported the illegal wildlife relocation to the authorities. Your neighbor will face fines at minimum." "Will they find them?" Ethan asked, hope fighting against despair in his voice. Amelia knelt to his level, her honesty tempered with compassion. "I don't know, Ethan. The forest is vast and raccoons are adaptable, but we're going to try our very best." The day that followed was the longest of Ethan's young life. While Amelia coordinated search efforts from her office, the Thompson family focused on caring for Rosie, who refused to eat and constantly called for her mother with heartbreaking little cries. "She needs formula," Martha said, watching the kit's half-hearted attempts to lap milk from a shallow dish. "She's still too young for solid food alone." Robert, who had been making phone calls all morning, grabbed his keys. "I'll drive to the pet supply store in Springfield. They might have formula for orphaned wildlife." Ethan sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the makeshift nest with Rosie positioned in front of him. "It's okay," he whispered to the frightened kit. "We're going to find your mom and dad and brothers and sister." "I promise." But as the hours passed with no news from the search teams, that promise felt increasingly hollow. By evening, Rosie had accepted some formula from an eyedropper but remained listless and distressed, constantly searching for her family. Amelia called at dusk, her voice heavy with the weight of bad news. The teams found signs of raccoons in 3 different areas, but no confirmed sightings of Maple or the kits. They'll resume searching tomorrow, but... She didn't need to finish the sentence. The forest was simply too vast, the animals too small and too easily hidden. That night, Ethan refused to sleep in his bed, instead camping out on the living room floor beside Rosie's nest. The small kit had finally exhausted herself into slumber, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "You should get some rest," Martha told him, bringing a blanket and pillow. "Tomorrow's another day." "What if they don't find them, Grandma?" Ethan asked, his voice small in the dimly lit room. "What if Maple and the others are gone forever?" Martha settled herself in the armchair near him, her aged face soft in the lamplight. "Then we'll have done everything we could, and we'll make sure Rosie grows up safe and healthy." "But she needs her family," Ethan insisted. "She's so little. She can't be alone." "She has us now," Martha said gently. "Sometimes families are formed in unexpected ways, Ethan. Sometimes the people or creatures who love us aren't the ones we were born to, but the ones who choose to stay." Ethan considered this, watching Rosie's small form. "Like you chose to stay with us After Mom died. Martha smiled sadly. Yes, exactly like that. Across town, in her small rented apartment, Amelia Parker sat at her kitchen table surrounded by maps of the state forest, marking search areas and planning the next day's efforts. The rational, scientific part of her mind knew the odds were against finding the raccoons. The forest covered thousands of acres, and raccoons were nocturnal, elusive creatures. But the part of her that had connected with Ethan's determined spirit, that had seen the unusual bond between the boy and Maple, refused to give up. There was something special about that raccoon family. Something that defied the normal patterns of wildlife behavior. If any raccoons could survive this ordeal and find their way, it would be Maple and Oak. Her phone rang, breaking her concentration. The caller ID showed her father's name, Theodore Harrison. Her finger hovered over the decline button before curiosity won out. "Hello, Father," she answered coolly. "Amelia." Harrison's voice sounded congested from his injured nose. "This situation has gotten out of hand." "I couldn't agree more. Illegal wildlife relocation is a serious offense." "Don't lecture me about legalities," Harrison snapped. "That Thompson man assaulted me. I could press charges, have him arrested." "But you haven't," Amelia observed. "Why is that?" A pause. "I'm calling to propose a solution. A compromise." "I'm listening." "The construction company Robert Thompson works for. I know the owner. I can arrange a better position for him, more money, better hours, and I can help with their financial situation. In exchange, this incident is forgotten, and you stop this ridiculous search for vermin that are already dead anyway." Amelia's grip tightened on her phone. "You're trying to buy your way out of this." "I'm trying to resolve it like a businessman," Harrison corrected. "Everyone gets something they want. Except Maple and her kids. Except Ethan, who's heartbroken. Except the ecosystem you've disrupted." Harrison sighed heavily. "Always the idealist, just like your mother. This is why you'll never succeed in the real world, Amelia. You can't see the practical solution for all your principles." "My principles are what guide me in the real world," Amelia replied. "And they're why I came back to Oak Ridge, not to spite you, but to protect what you seem determined to destroy." "Very poetic," Harrison said dryly. "Consider my offer. It expires tomorrow." After he hung up, Amelia sat motionless, staring at the maps before her. Her father hadn't changed, still believing money could solve any problem, still viewing the natural world as something to be controlled or eliminated. And yet, a better job for Robert Thompson would help that struggling family significantly. The ethical dilemma kept her awake long into the night, until she finally collapsed into a restless sleep at her kitchen table, her dreams filled with raccoons running through endless forests, always just out of reach. Dawn broke over Oak Ridge with a heavy rainfall that seemed to match the mood in the Thompson household. Ethan woke to find Rosie more active but still distressed, making pitiful sounds as she searched the nest for her missing family. "I know," Ethan soothed, offering her formula with the eyedropper. "I miss them too." Robert entered the living room, phone in hand and a grim expression on his face. "That was Amelia. The search teams are delayed because of the rain, and—" He hesitated, glancing at Martha before continuing. "Harrison came to her with an offer. He wants to arrange a better job for me in exchange for dropping this whole thing." "You're not considering it?" Martha asked sharply. "Of course not," Robert replied. "But it makes our financial situation harder to ignore. I got another notice from the bank yesterday. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage, Mom. They're talking foreclosure." The word hung heavily in the air. Ethan might not have understood all the financial details, but he knew what foreclosure meant, losing their home, the only place he had left that held memories of his mother. "We'll figure something out. Martha said with more confidence than she clearly felt. "We always do." Robert nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "I need to get to work. Double shift today." After he left, the house fell into a somber quiet broken only by Rosie's occasional cries. Ethan spent the morning caring for her, researching raccoon rehabilitation on the family's ancient computer and staring out the window at the rain-soaked yard, willing Maple to appear. By afternoon, the rain had intensified, drumming against the roof and windows with increasing force. Flood warnings scrolled across the bottom of the TV screen during Martha's soap operas. "This storm's setting in for the day," she observed, bringing Ethan a sandwich he didn't want. "Try to eat something, dear. You need your strength." Ethan took a half-hearted bite, more to please his grandmother than from any real appetite. How could he eat when Maple and the others were out in this downpour? Were they huddled together somewhere, cold and wet and frightened? Or had they already succumbed to predators, hunger, or exposure? The phone rang, startling both of them. Martha answered, her expression shifting from polite inquiry to surprise. "Yes, he's here." "One moment." She covered the receiver. "Ethan, it's for you. Mrs. Peterson from down the street." Confused, Ethan took the phone. Mrs. Peterson was an elderly widow who rarely spoke to anyone in the neighborhood except to complain about noise or property boundaries. "Hello? Ethan Thompson?" Mrs. Peterson's quavering voice came through the line. "I think you should know there's a raccoon on my back porch." "Biggest one I've ever seen, just sitting there staring at my door like it's waiting for an invitation to tea." Ethan's heart leaped. "Does it have a marking on its face? Like a maple leaf?" "Can't rightly see from here, but it's got something unusual about its face, sure enough. Thought you might want to know, since your grandmother mentioned you had a way with animals." "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. Please don't scare it away. I'll be right there." Ethan was already pulling on his rain boots as he hung up, hope surging through him for the first time in 24 hours. "What is it?" Martha asked, alarmed by his sudden energy. "A raccoon at Mrs. Peterson's. It might be oak or maple." He was halfway to the door when he remembered Rosie. "Grandma, can you bring Rosie in her nest? If it is one of her parents, they'll want to see her." The 3-block dash to Mrs. Peterson's house in pouring rain would normally have left Ethan drenched and miserable. Today, he barely noticed the water soaking through his jacket and plastering his hair to his forehead. Martha followed more slowly in her raincoat, carrying Rosie's nest protected under a large umbrella. Mrs. Peterson met them at her front door, a tiny woman with a permanent expression of suspicion. "Around back," she instructed, pointing to the side gate. "Still there last I checked. Strange behavior for a wild animal." Ethan approached the back porch slowly, heart pounding, and there, just as Mrs. Peterson had described, sat a large raccoon, Oak, unmistakable with his distinctive gray facial markings. He was soaking wet, his fur matted from the rain, but very much alive and alert. "Oak," Ethan called softly. "It's me. It's Ethan." The raccoon's head snapped toward his voice, intelligent eyes fixing on him with what seemed like recognition. Oak chittered softly, rising onto his hind legs for a better view. "I've got Rosie," Ethan said, gesturing to Martha, who was carefully approaching with the nest. "She's safe. Where's Maple? Where are the others?" As if in answer, Oak dropped to all fours and moved to the edge of the porch, looking back at Ethan expectantly before starting down the steps. "I think he wants us to follow him," Ethan said, already moving after the raccoon. "In this weather?" Martha protested. "Ethan, we should call Amelia first." But Ethan was already following Oak, who was leading them across Mrs. Peterson's backyard toward the wooded area that bordered several properties in the neighborhood. The raccoon moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to ensure Ethan was still following. "He knows where they are, Grandma," Ethan called back. "We have to go now." Martha hesitated only briefly before adjusting her grip on the umbrella and nest. "Mrs. Peterson, would you please call Amelia Parker at the wildlife office? Tell her to come to the woods behind your house immediately." The woods, normally a peaceful green space between neighborhoods, had transformed into a muddy, treacherous maze under the torrential rain. Oak navigated the slippery terrain with ease, while Ethan slipped and stumbled, determination driving him forward. Martha struggled to keep up, protecting Rosie from the rain while trying to maintain her footing on the muddy path. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, Oak veered off the main trail toward a fallen oak tree, its massive trunk creating a natural shelter. He disappeared beneath the tangle of branches and roots. Ethan dropped to his knees, peering into the shadowy space beneath the tree. At first he saw nothing but darkness. Then a familiar, chittering sound reached his ears, and a pair of eyes reflected the dim light. Maple's eyes, recognizable even in the gloom. "Maple!" Ethan cried, joy and relief flooding through him. "You're alive." A year passed, marked by the slow changing of seasons in Oak Ridge. Spring's tentative blossoms gave way to summer's lush greenery, which surrendered to autumn's fiery display before winter wrapped the town in its quiet embrace. Now, as a new spring awakened the world once more, Ethan Thompson stood at the edge of his backyard, watching the morning sun filter through newly leafed branches. So much had changed in 12 months. The Thompson house, once on the brink of foreclosure, now stood freshly painted in a warm blue that reminded Ethan of his mother's favorite color. The mortgage was current, the crushing medical debt restructured into manageable payments. In the side yard, construction materials lay neatly stacked, waiting for the weekend when Robert would continue building the small addition that would serve as Martha's new bedroom, allowing her to avoid the stairs that had become increasingly difficult for her aging knees. Most significant of all was the change in Robert himself. No longer did he shuffle through the house like a ghost, eyes downcast and shoulders bent under invisible weight. These days he moved with purpose, his voice carrying an authority and confidence that had been missing since Sarah's death. His construction uniform had been replaced by the familiar khaki of the Oak Ridge Wildlife Management Department, where he now served as Amelia Parker's deputy director. The journey from that rainy day beneath the fallen oak tree to the present had been neither simple nor straight. Finding Maple and her remaining kits, Bandit and Scout, but no sign of Shadow, had been just the beginning. The Raccoon family was malnourished, hypothermic, and traumatized by their ordeal in the state forest. Shadow's absence was a painful reminder of the consequences of Harrison's actions. Amelia had arrived at the fallen tree just as Ethan and Martha were coaxing the frightened raccoons out of their makeshift shelter. Her expertise had been crucial in stabilizing the animals before transporting them to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center she'd mentioned during her first visit to the Thompson home. There, Maple, Oak, and the kits received proper medical care while being reunited with Rosie, whose excited chittering upon seeing her family had brought tears to Ethan's eyes. The Rehabilitation Center became Ethan's second home that summer. Every weekend, and many weekday evenings, Robert would drive him the 40 miles to visit the Raccoon family. Ethan would sit for hours in the specialized enclosure, watching the kits grow stronger and more confident under their parents' guidance. The center's staff marveled at the unusual family dynamics: the devoted father, the intelligent mother, the distinct personalities of each kit, and at Ethan's unbreakable bond with them. "They're special," the head rehabilitator had told Robert one afternoon. "Not just their behavior, which is remarkable, but their impact on your son. He has a gift for understanding them." Robert had nodded, watching Ethan demonstrate to a younger volunteer the proper way to offer food without encouraging dependency. His mother was the same way. She could read animals like most people read books. As summer progressed, discussions began about the raccoon's future. They couldn't stay at the center indefinitely, but their unusual level of habituation to humans made traditional release problematic. Ethan had lobbied passionately for bringing them home, but both Amelia and Robert gently explained the legal and ethical complications. "They need to be wild, Ethan," Amelia had explained. "That's what's best for them, even if it's hard for us." The solution had come from an unexpected source. The elderly director of the rehabilitation center, impressed by both the raccoons and Ethan's dedication, had proposed making the family ambassador animals for their educational program. Under this arrangement, Maple, Oak, and the Kits would live in a spacious, natural enclosure at the center, helping teach visitors about wildlife while receiving proper care for their semi-wild status. "They'd have a good life," the director had explained. "Safe, well-fed, with enough space to follow their natural behaviors. And you could visit them regularly, even volunteer with their care when you're older." It wasn't perfect. Ethan still dreamed of Maple living freely in their backyard. But it was a compromise that ensured the raccoon's well-being while maintaining his connection to them. The day they were moved to their permanent enclosure, a beautiful woodland habitat with a flowing stream and multiple den sites, Ethan had felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. "They'll be happy here," Robert had assured him, one hand on his son's shoulder as they watched Maple explore her new home, the Kits tumbling excitedly after her. "I know," Ethan had replied. "I just wish they could be free." "Sometimes freedom looks different than we expect," Martha had observed wisely. "They're free from hunger, free from danger, free to be together. That's no small thing." Ethan's regular visits to the center had led to more than just continued connection with Maple's family. His knowledge and gentle way with animals had impressed the staff, leading to an invitation to join their junior volunteer program, despite being a year younger than their usual minimum age. Every Saturday, he now worked alongside rehabilitators, learning wildlife care and conservation principles while sharing his unique insights. The experience had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing since his mother's death. His school performance improved dramatically as he connected his studies to his newfound passion. Science classes that had once seemed boring became fascinating when viewed through the lens of animal behavior and ecology. Even math took on new meaning when applied to wildlife population studies. At home, the empty shed that had once housed Maple's family was transformed into Ethan's research station, where he kept meticulous records of his observations at the rehabilitation center and conducted simple experiments in animal enrichment that he then shared with the staff. His bedroom walls, once bare, now displayed his increasingly sophisticated wildlife drawings alongside photographs of Maple and her family. The changes in the Thompson household extended beyond Ethan. Robert's confrontation with Harrison, from the punch that broke the developer's nose to the subsequent discovery of Maple's family, had catalyzed a profound shift in his life's direction. When criminal charges for the illegal wildlife relocation threatened Harrison's reputation and business interests, he had attempted to leverage his connections to bury the incident. Instead, the case had gained local media attention, focusing unwelcome scrutiny on both Harrison's development practices and Oak Ridge's wildlife management policies. In the midst of this controversy, Amelia had approached Robert with an unexpected proposition. A position in the newly expanded Wildlife Management Department, drawing on his previous experience and training. The salary wasn't as high as construction had been during boom times, but it offered stability, benefits, and work that reconnected him with his original passion. "I don't know, Amelia," he had hesitated. "It's been years since I was in the field. I'm not sure I remember half of what I used to know." "You remembered enough to stand up at that town meeting," she had countered. "And enough to recognize what your son and those raccoons needed. The technical details can be relearned. The instinct and judgment, those are harder to teach." Robert had accepted the position on a trial basis, expecting to feel like a novice again. Instead, he found himself falling back into the rhythms and knowledge of wildlife work with surprising ease, as if returning to a language temporarily forgotten but deeply embedded in his mind. Within 6 months, he had become Amelia's most trusted colleague, bringing a practical perspective that complemented her scientific approach. Their professional partnership gradually evolved into something more personal, a slow-building friendship founded on mutual respect that, over time, began to hint at deeper possibilities. They were careful around Ethan, both aware of the complexity of introducing new emotional dynamics into his life, but the boy proved more perceptive than they anticipated. "It's okay if you like, Mrs. Parker, Dad," he had said one evening after Amelia had joined them for dinner for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. "Mom would want you to be happy." The statement, delivered with such simple certainty, had left Robert speechless, tears gathering in his eyes as he pulled his son into a tight embrace. Martha, witnessing the exchange from the kitchen doorway, had smiled knowingly. "That boy has his mother's heart and his father's directness. Quite the combination." Not all changes in Oak Ridge had been positive. Theodore Harrison's reputation suffered significantly from the Raccoon incident, with many residents reevaluating their support for his aggressive development agenda. The division between Old Oak Ridge and the newer developments deepened, with community meetings often devolving into heated debates about growth versus conservation. Harrison himself became increasingly bitter, especially as Amelia's wildlife management plan gained popularity and his daughter's professional standing in the community solidified. He continued to push his development projects but faced growing resistance from an energized coalition of environmentally conscious residents, many inspired by the Thompson family's story. The reconciliation between father and daughter that Amelia had secretly hoped for never materialized. Harrison's pride wouldn't allow him to acknowledge his errors, and Amelia eventually accepted that some relationships couldn't be repaired. Instead, she focused her energy on building Oak Ridge's wildlife program into a model for other communities, with Robert as her most valuable ally. For Ethan, the most difficult adjustment had been returning to school after the summer of Maple's rescue. The quiet, withdrawn boy who had moved invisibly through hallways was gone, replaced by a child with stories to tell and passions to share. This transformation brought attention, some welcome, some not. Raccoon Boy became his unwanted nickname among certain classmates, accompanied by chittering noises and exaggerated hand-washing gestures. The teasing might have crushed the old Ethan, but the new one had developed a resilience born from purpose. "They can call me whatever they want," he told his father, after a particularly difficult day. "I know what I'm doing matters." His confidence was bolstered by unexpected allies. Ms. Wilson, his science teacher, incorporated his experiences into classroom discussions, elevating his status from oddity to expert. The school principal, impressed by his volunteer work, invited him to give a presentation on local wildlife during an assembly. Even Mrs. Peterson, the neighborhood's resident complainer, became an unlikely supporter, proudly telling anyone who would listen about that Thompson boy who understood animals better than most adults. The story of Maple and her family spread beyond Oak Ridge, featured first in local papers and then picked up by regional news as a heartwarming tale of conservation. A children's book author, captivated by the account, approached the Thompsons about creating an illustrated story based on Ethan and Maple's bond. The modest advance payment had helped with household expenses, but more valuable was the platform it provided for wildlife education. Through all these changes, one constant remained: Ethan's connection to Maple and her family. Though he could no longer spend every day with them, their bond seemed to transcend the physical separation. During his weekly visits to the rehabilitation center, Maple would immediately approach when he entered their enclosure, chittering softly in what the staff swore was a special greeting reserved only for him. The kits, growing rapidly toward adulthood, remained individually distinct in personality but united in their recognition of the human boy who had once saved their lives. Now, as Ethan stood in his backyard on this spring morning exactly 1 year after Maple's rescue from the fallen tree, he reflected on the journey they had all taken. He had come here with purpose, checking the old shed one final time before the weekend visit to the rehabilitation center. Inside, he had left the window open as always, maintaining the tradition, even though no raccoons had used the space since Maple's family departed. To his surprise, when he had opened the shed door, he discovered small, distinctive paw prints in the thin layer of dust on the floor. A raccoon had visited during the night. But why? The shed contained no food, no particular attraction for wild animals. Curious, Ethan had searched the space carefully, finding nothing unusual until he checked the small shelf where he had once kept supplies for Maple's care. There, arranged with unmistakable deliberation, sat a collection of objects: a smooth river stone, a bottle cap, a small feather, and most remarkably, a perfectly formed maple leaf, its distinctive shape echoing the marking on Maple's face. The items resembled the gifts Oak had brought to Maple during their time in the shed, small treasures gathered and presented with apparent purpose. Someone had brought these objects here. Someone who remembered. Lost in contemplation of this mystery, Ethan almost missed the movement at the edge of the woods behind their property. A flash of gray-brown fur, a distinctive ringed tail disappearing into the underbrush. He froze, hardly daring to breathe as he scanned the tree line. There, a face peering out from between two shrubs, not Maple, not Oak, but a young adult raccoon with a distinctive pink tinge to its nose. Rosie, she had grown into her adult size, her baby fluffiness replaced by sleek fur, but her curious expression remained unmistakable. Ethan's heart leaped. The rehabilitation center was 40 miles away. Had she escaped? Traveled all that distance? But how would she have found her way to the exact location of her birth? Before he could process these questions, another raccoon emerged beside Rosie, smaller, with distinctive markings that Ethan didn't recognize. A younger raccoon, perhaps this year's kit. Behind them, partially hidden by foliage, stood a third figure, whose size and bearing suggested a male. The realization dawned slowly. This wasn't Rosie from the rehabilitation center. This was Shadow. The missing kit, the one they had never found after Harrison's cruel relocation. Somehow, against all odds, Shadow had survived in the wild. Not only survived, but thrived, forming his own family who now stood at the edge of the yard, regarding Ethan with unmistakable intentness. "Shadow?" Ethan whispered, taking a small step forward. The adult raccoon chittered softly, moving slightly toward Ethan before stopping, maintaining a cautious distance. The younger raccoon followed, mimicking Shadow's movements with precise attention. For several minutes, human and raccoons regarded each other across the yard, connected by an invisible thread of shared history, yet separated by the natural wariness of wild creatures. Ethan made no attempt to approach further, understanding instinctively that this moment required patience and respect. Finally, Shadow made a soft sound to his companions and turned back toward the woods. The smaller raccoon followed immediately, but Rosie lingered, her gaze fixed on Ethan for a moment longer before she too disappeared into the underbrush. Ethan remained motionless, tears streaming down his face as the full significance of the encounter washed over him. Shadow had survived. Against all odds, through winter storms and predators and the challenges of the wild, the lost kit had grown into an adult capable of forming his own family. And somehow, He had remembered this place, remembered enough to return and leave his strange collection of gifts in the shed where he was born. "Ethan?" Robert's voice called from the back door. "Breakfast is ready. We need to leave for the center in an hour." "Coming, Dad," Ethan replied, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Should he tell his father about Shadow's visit? About the gifts in the shed? Part of him wanted to keep the experience private, a special secret between himself and the raccoons. But another part, the part that had grown and matured through sharing Maple's story, knew that some wonders were meant to be shared. As he turned toward the house, a movement caught his eye, a flash of fur at the forest edge. For just a moment, Ethan thought he glimpsed another familiar face, a raccoon with a maple leaf marking watching from the shadows. But when he blinked, the image was gone, leaving him to wonder if it had been real or merely the product of hope and memory. Real or imagined, the moment filled Ethan with a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with a small act of kindness toward a dying raccoon had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined, touching lives both human and animal in ways that continued to ripple outward. As he walked back to the house, Ethan carried with him not just the joy of Shadow's survival, but a deeper understanding of what his grandmother had tried to tell him that rainy night a year ago. Love, once given, found its own ways to return, sometimes in expected forms, like Maple's affection at the rehabilitation center, and sometimes in surprising ones like Shadow's mysterious gifts or the unexpected healing of his own broken family. "Dad," Ethan said as he entered the kitchen where Robert stood flipping pancakes, "you won't believe what just happened." And as he shared the story of Shadow's visit, Ethan watched his father's face transform with wonder and pride, the same expressions he had seen the day they found Maple beneath the fallen tree, the day Robert had punched Theodore Harrison, the day they had together chosen paths that aligned with their deepest values rather than their immediate interests. Some might call it coincidence that a raccoon family had stumbled into their lives at precisely the moment when the Thompson family was most fractured by grief. Some might attribute Maple's unusual behavior to simple adaptation rather than emotional connection. Some might dismiss Shadow's return as nothing more than territorial instinct. But Ethan knew differently. He had witnessed something extraordinary in that year of growth and change, a convergence of lives across species boundaries that had transformed them all. And as he prepared to visit Maple and her family at the rehabilitation center, he carried with him the certainty that the greatest adventures often begin with the smallest acts of compassion, and that true family transcends all conventional definitions, finding its essence in love freely given and joyfully returned. In the woods behind the Thompson house, Shadow led his family deeper into the forest, their path eventually crossing a small stream where the raccoons paused to wash their clever paws. Though they appeared to any observer as simply wild animals following their natural instincts, they moved with a purpose that suggested something more, a awareness and intelligence shaped by extraordinary circumstances. And far away in their spacious enclosure at the rehabilitation center, Maple and Oak raised their heads simultaneously as if sensing a distant connection renewed. Their remaining kits, now nearly grown, continued their morning activities, unaware of the subtle shift in their parents' attention. Only Rosie, her pink-tinged nose twitching thoughtfully, seemed to share in some silent communication that transcended distance and understanding. The circle was complete, yet ever expanding, a reminder that in a world often defined by separation and loss, connection remains the most powerful force of all. Dear friends, isn't it remarkable how the simple acts of kindness we show can transform lives in ways we never imagined? Ethan's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when grief seems overwhelming and hope feels distant, unexpected connections can heal our broken hearts. Like Martha wisely observed, Sometimes families are formed in unexpected ways. Whether it's a grandmother stepping in after loss, a father finding new purpose, or even a wild creature recognizing the hand that once saved it. Many of us in our golden years have weathered storms of loss and change, yet like Robert Thompson, we can discover renewed purpose when we align our lives with what truly matters. The miraculous return of Shadow, surviving against all odds, mirrors our own resilience, our capacity to rebuild and find joy even after devastating setbacks. What unexpected connection has brought healing to your life after a period of grief? Or perhaps, like Ethan's father, have you rediscovered an old passion that gave your life new meaning? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.